This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, we now bring you a discussion on Monsoon Session, Key Bills, Discussions and No Confidence Motion. The participants are K.V. Prasad, Professor Subrato Mukherjee, Political Analyst, and Neelabh Srivastava, Journalist.
The monsoon session of the Parliament came to an end today. This began on July 20th and both the houses, the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha, were adjourned sine die, as it is called. And during this session, which is also to be underlined that this is the penultimate session before the country goes for general elections in 2024. We will have a winter session somewhere around November, December this year, and then next year, say around April, we'll have general elections in the country. So during this session, we had some key bills discussions, also the opposition's no confidence motion, the current prevailing situation in the state of Manipur, which is seeing an ethnic conflict for almost 3 months now, and also the kind of politics that was at play. Now, first we're talking about different important bills, and one of the most important bills that came today was presented by the Union Home Minister, which was about the replacing the British era IPC, CRPC and Indian Evidence Act. Also, I cannot forget to mention that there were other important bills like the Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi Amendment Bill, which is also called as the Services Bill, which has do a lot of discussion and politics. Also, the National Nursing and Midwifery Commission Bill, the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill. Coming first to you, Professor Mukherjee, how do you see the entire session, about 3 weeks of the monsoon session? The important bills, but also associated with the kind of politics that we have seen, a lot of adjournments and the bills being passed in the den.
Parliamentary system scores over the presidential, especially in the 3 sessions that you have mentioned, where there is a close contact with the executive and the legislature, though the meetings are a continuous process because of the committee system. Now, if you really look to this session, as you say that the election is also will be there within a year. The basic function of legislature is to legislate, and I think the important legislations that was done in a not exactly in a very happy manner because of the lack of participation of the opposition most of the time. And I like to remind you that opposition is a part of the government, and that's the strength of a parliamentary system, that the multi-party system really translates and transmits the idea of the people to the legislative assembly, and that is channelized in a final form, and that creates the stability of the entire system. But again, here I'd like to point out that the indications are that the Indian parliament is maturing. If you may remember Bavlankar's famous wish that he would recognize the opposition only with the 10% of the seats. Slowly it is consolidating, as we find first in the states, many of that has become bi-party, and even at the center, now we find a consolidation of 2 forces, which I think speaks really that the Indian democracy has come of age. And within this larger framework, the monsoon session, the result is mixed, and the most important thing was the no confidence motion and the problems of the Manipur situation, and that led to a lively discussion. And I would like to say that the level of the debate in the no confidence motion was quite high.
Mr. Prasad, the government also has its legislative business to do. It has to get the bills passed so that the normal functioning of the government keeps happening. So in that context, a number of bills, especially the services bill that had a lot of political ramifications, the data protection bill also. So how do you see these bills in the terms of their importance, and also on the last day, the bills that will replace henceforth the IPC, CRPC and the Indian Evidence Act with the criminal justice system of the country that will be changed?
The country is heading for elections, and so the parliamentary calendar is squeezing in. When I say that we'll have just 3 sessions before we go for the next elections, the last of the 3 sessions just got over today. That means the monsoon session is over. So Parliament will be really left with just 2 more sessions, the budget session and the winter session in between. Now, we all know in the parliamentary calendar, monsoon and winter sessions become primarily important focus points, sessions for the government to get its legislative business out of the way. Why? Because the budget session is largely devoted, even though it's the longest, it's largely devoted to the budget discussion on financial allocations and the passage of the finance bill. So that being the focus, very little legislative agenda other than this gets going. So that's having been said, the government was well within its, because they are running out of time before they go in for next elections. They would like to complete what all they promised and whatever the agenda they have on the minds to in the form of legislative activities. The Delhi Services Bill was the one which replaced the ordinance. We all heard the debate, contentious, yes. Drew the opposition lines and the government, people supporting the government very clearly. The Data Protection Bill remains a work. Of course, it has been enacted by Parliament, but I think, as Professor Mukherjee mentioned, in the absence of a robust discussion from the opposition benches, we don't really have a bill which I think satiates the concerns of many sections. We had reports coming in newspapers to that effect. Of course, Jan Sunwai we hear is going to change the way, making it easier for many people, less cumbersome in terms of minor offences, attracting major penalties and stuff like that. But I think significant is we also have to remember, apart from the bills you mentioned about IPC and CRPC and Evidence Act, is a bill we heard is the Election Commission thing they're talking of. It's coming up. So I think all these are important bills when we take up for discussion. And as for IPC, that is going to, I think the context is also the law of sedition. That being courts having taken cognizance of it and the government having said what it said about it's going to come up with sedition. So we heard the Home Minister say, and if these bills have now been referred to the Standing Committee of Parliament with jurisdiction, we can hear some kind of debate in the committee, not necessarily in Parliament till it comes up for voting at the later stage. Neelabh.
Professor Mukherjee, again put the Manipur question to you, because when the session was getting into motion just before July 20th, the Manipur situation had erupted in May, and the political parties had said that we need the answers from the government, also wanted the Prime Minister to speak, and now we have seen the Home Minister and Prime Minister both have spoken about it. Different political parties, when they were given times, they also discussed various issues that probably were relevant to their states, but also spoke about the issue in Manipur. How do you see, was the Manipur situation discussed as much as it was required?
The issue, the Manipur thing, not only has become volatile, but also in a way had occupied the center stage because of the continuity of violence for a long time, and also in a way the interaction between the opposition and the government was not reflected earlier. And the government also maintained silence on many of the things, maybe because of the security reasons, and the opposition was annoyed because of it. But ultimately it was resolved, as it happens in a parliamentary democracy, in a debate in the Lok Sabha, there which both the sides put its point. And here I'd like to point out that Gaurav Gogoi made the very impressive presentation with facts and figures, with the added advantage that he comes from the Northeast, and that really set the agenda for the entire discussion. And after that, we find that the different arguments, both at the Manipur level and the ramification at the All India level, were put up by the opposition, and also that the defense came mainly from the Home Minister. Here I'd like to point out that though the Prime Minister is the most important player in the cabinet, but in a situation like this, I think it is imperative that the Home Minister takes the charge and really satisfies the House. And in that context, we find that there are many speakers, and there was also an element of drama, because after the exit of Mr. Rahul Gandhi from the Lok Sabha and the re-entry created a new kind of a atmosphere, and he also made his points in a, not exactly in a very long speech, but in a small one, pointing out the ramifications of it. But the government also replied. Now, in the context of this also, I like to mention, the suspensions. First in the Rajya Sabha of Derek O'Brien, and then we come to the Lok Sabha situation of Adhir Ranjan. That really brings the entire discussion to a very different kind of discussion. Now, if you really ask me, that suspensions, though it is part of the procedure and the right of the speaker to initiate it, but I think they should be avoided to the minimum, and whatever the reasons, it is better to tolerate and see that the free speech spirit of the parliament is not impinged in any way. But whatever it may be, I think Manipur being a very important and divisive issue, with the opposition getting agitated about what they consider to be inaction. On the other hand, the government defended its position and the result of the no confidence was expected. But then the important point is that both the Prime Minister and the opposition and the Home Minister exchanged their views, and whatever might have been the differences, ultimately they reflect the consolidation of the democratic system in India.
Mr. Prasad, the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, they were the main speakers on this front. The other ministers also spoke. So the kind of volume that the government spoke with a perspective of what has happened in the Northeast earlier and what these steps they are taking. The opposition speech, including Congress leader Rahul Gandhi's speech, was about the concern that is not being shown as it should have been. So how do you weigh these two sides and what exactly went into it? Also given the fact that there were other bills also where a lot of political maneuvering was seen, in particularly in this context, all the parties, government and the opposition, in the last 2-3 days that the discussion happened.
Well, if you're looking at what happened on Manipur, I think there are two issues. Of course, the opposition got an opportunity. They made no bones about it that they're going to bring the no conference primarily to get the government speak. And when they said the government, they're very clear. They wanted the Prime Minister to say something on Manipur, which he eventually did. He did at the beginning of the session when he addressed the media before the start of the session on Manipur, expressing his anguish of what happened and promising that the steps will be taken, nobody would be spared. And then the opposition wanted him to come and say what the government has to say in the House. So that was the bone of contention largely in Rajya Sabha. I'll come to that part later. But in the Lok Sabha, obviously, there was a change of tactics, which they brought about the no confidence motion with Manipur at the core of it. And I think this political signaling, if one were to look at it, was to field Mr. Gaurav Gogoi as the lead speaker because his motion, number one, which got admitted. So he had the right to move the motion, and he did what he did, and we just heard Professor Mukherjee comment on what the statements came and what the speech meant. Now, I think it was the opportunity for the government to say what it had to say on Manipur and the large debate, because a no confidence motion is an omnibus motion, because anything and everything can be done. After all, what the opposition is saying is we have no confidence in this Council of Ministers or in the Union Council of Ministers. Thereby, it's everything and anything. That's the thing. And it's the most potent tool that the opposition has in its armory in a parliamentary democracy. Here, I would just want to add one more point. I personally feel that somewhere the opposition probably had lost its way, in particular in Rajya Sabha, where it kept on insisting that the debate on Manipur should be held under Rule 267, which obviously is a substantive motion, which they thought, but there's a technicality to it because the admission of it will be depending on how the government can work its schedules. So I think it was too late in the day when they decided to go back to another rule which would have had a debate, but I think it was a case of they lost the script. So I think the opposition should have been a little more careful and calculate well before it maximized its position and didn't know where to withdraw. That's my observation, Neelabh.
Professor Mukherjee, the no confidence motion, historically, as the data suggests and as the facts are, that it is traditionally, there has never been a chance when the no confidence motion has always been defeated. But in the context of the recent alliance of the opposition parties, the government accused the other parties, including during the discussion on this Delhi Services Bill, that all the political parties have come together because of the new alliance that they have created in view of the forthcoming general elections in the country, that is the INDIA, wherein the other parties, the opposition parties, had a viewpoint that no, this is not the fact, but this is because having such a system where bureaucrats will have a heavy hand than probably the elected representatives is not something which is constitutionally good. So how do you see these discussions happening vis-a-vis not only the Delhi Services Bill, but also during the Manipur discussion, both these discussions?
You see, the Delhi situation is quite complex because what was being proposed by the opposition and also the Supreme Court judgment held them in that, and then the revision that the Treasury benches wanted is all reflective to the multiplicity authorities in Delhi. I think if you really look to the governmental structure, you'll find that the basic powers of the state is missing here. The land and the home being under the central government. And that is because of the special nature of Delhi and also the fact that it's a very sensitive issue. Now the question is the limit of democracy in a way. The argument that the civil service, whether it's transfer and assignment of duties, should be the prerogative of the cabinet led by the chief minister is applicable in most of the places or all the places. But Delhi being an exception, it is to be debated and a consensus would have emerged. That would have been better. But here again we find that the treasury benches and the opposition are at a variance. But here again I like to point out that the opposition, when they were in power or were in many ways associated with the decision-making process, the older system followed. So it's a question, it's a departure, it's a new thing that was being experimented. Now, if that is the case, I think a bigger discussion and consensus amongst all the political parties is very important, because this is an issue just which does not have a local ramification, but it has a national and international as well.
Mr. Prasad, when we speak about the entire duration of the session, what we have seen earlier, there was no change this time also, and we've seen a lot of suspensions of the members happening, adjournments, and the chairs in both the houses, both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, expressing concern of the actual debate time or actual discussion time not being taken place. We've seen walkouts happening. You have seen these sessions of so many years. How do you see that this particular problem, should say that as a problem, that where the discussion doesn't happen for one way or the other? Opposition has its own reasons, the government has its own reasons. So this takes out the vital time of discussions. As we spoke, there are so many important bills that were lined up and they got passed here.
Well, I think passage of law is one important aspect of Parliament. Nobody can deny it. But apart from that, it's the most important and the most available platform where we debate and discuss ideas and contest ideas and then come to a consensus. And of all the years that I have reported Parliament, I have noticed that these kind of standoffs have been quite often, right? But there was one thing in common. There was a spirit of accommodation. And when I say spirit of accommodation, it means the government would, it followed the age-old saying that while the opposition can have its say, the government will have its way. Eventually, the responsibility of the government to make sure that Parliament, its agenda is through. And remember, Parliament cannot function till both the opposition and the government work together. So that is where the spirit of accommodation comes in. When there is a standoff, parliamentary managers of different sides come together, discuss various options, and eventually come with a solution. So they have to find a solution to it. So when I said that accommodation, it is both sides decide, okay, this is the positions where we are, and this is a position which we can accept, which will take you forward. So that probably has not been seen so often in the last few years for various reasons, probably. But then I always believe when you have politicians, there is going to be politics. Without that, it cannot be. And Parliament is a place where process and politics have to go through for something to come out of it. That cannot be taken away. This is a situation that I have always observed. Eventually, the leadership on every side has to come together and see what is the best way forward, Neelabh.
Professor Mukherjee, especially if we talk about the no confidence motion, was about the Manipur situation, and the opposition says that the government spoke less about it and more about what they have done over the last 9 years. You would have seen the last so many no confidence motions happening in the Parliament. What exactly is the strategy for the understanding of our listeners? What exactly remains the strategy of the government and also of the opposition? How to probably ambush them on a particular subject, and how does the government take it, including also the kind of work that they have done over the years? So how does it happen?
Well, the treasury benches would like to defend, and the opposition would like to point out the shortcomings. And as Prasad says, that the consensual democratic framework that we find in many other established democracies is not there as far as the domestic policies are concerned, though there is a larger degree of consensus in foreign policy. But within this larger parameter, if you really look to the working of the federal government and the talk of cooperative federalism, all of them being increasingly questioned in recent years. And the reason is also because of the way the Indian politics has evolved. If you really look to the Indian states, a large number of them being governed by the opposition, whereas in the Lok Sabha, the numbers for the treasury benches is overwhelming. In that kind of a situation, there is a tension, and also the fact that all the political parties will like to really spearhead in a way their points of view, and also try to tell to the electorate that whether we have succeeded or failed, but the fact remains we have tried our best. Ultimately, you see, the competitiveness gives life to democracy, and the electoral politics of all the political parties and leaders have a normally larger view than just the lifespan of one session of the parliament. But in the context of the overall decline of parliament worldwide, I don't think Indian parliament is doing exactly very badly. It has kept pace with the time. It has legislated on very important issues, even this monsoon session. And in that way, I think we can hope for a much better future with the larger consensual framework evolving.
So speaking about the important bills that were passed by the Parliament, one that I found was the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2023. And now if I can go through what the government has envisaged as per this bill is that it provides for the processing of digital personal data in such a manner that it recognizes both the rights of the individuals to protect their personal data and also need to process such personal data for lawful purposes, the law enforcement agencies obviously, and for matters connected therewith, as in the obligations of data fiduciaries and the data principles. My question to both of you, Mr. Prasad and Professor Mukherjee, that the data protection bill was debated, discussed in both inside the house, and also we have seen the comments being made by the opposition parties outside, walk out of the house. Also the government ministers and all. So how do you see that this is going to sail through? Is it that it's very concerning, or is it that there will be more discussions when it comes to the next session of the parliament? Is there a scope for going back and discussing these bills in one way or the other, not only the data protection bill, this is one of the most important ones, but the other ones also?
Personal data protection bill, this is a bill that has been in the works. I remember the government had withdrawn the previous version and said it will reintroduce the bill. It has done that, and probably I think this has, post the bill coming into public domain, there have been concerns expressed by different people, stakeholders, especially on what it might do in terms of impining on personal data protection in particular, and how it affects the other angles, whether it is right to information and so on and so on. We just read reports coming here and there. So I don't know if the last word has been said, but yes, we do need data protection because it's in an increasingly digital world. The footprints are long, will remain for a long period of time, and we all need protection. The data protection is important. But will that cast a shadow on other rights is something which we don't know. And I think this is where concerns have been expressed. So the government has said it has taken a 360-degree view of what's been talked about. But this is still a work in progress is what I'm looking at.
Professor Mukherjee, has the last word been said on this bill and also vis-a-vis the IPC, CRPC bills, because they are still going to be going to the Standing Committee of the Home Affairs, but in terms of the other bills where the concerns are still remaining, so how do you see this?
No, I think it will be a prolonged debate, not only during the legislation, but even after the legislation, because individual rights is a very sensitive and important issue, and any intrusion to it will be a continuous process, and legal actions will also follow in future. But right now the important point is to make a balance between the individual rights and the state responsibility. And that's a very delicate issue. And as we find that even in the United States, a Patriot Act created a lot of uncertainties. But as Prasad says, that the Data Act is a very important one. Even medical details and others are very important. So we have to sail through and create confidence in the people, assuring the people that utmost confidence will be maintained and the rights will be protected. Ultimately, democracy based on protection of individual rights.
Mr. Prasad, going from this session to the next, we have the perspective of the general elections also going to happen in the next year. But in the middle, we also have the state elections, 5 major states, which will go to polls, and that will also be a kind of a precursor to the elections that will be held next year. So the kind of alliances that we are seeing now, we are also seeing the opposition alliance, INDIA, and also the NDA alliance, the party in power, and the kind of everyone trying to increase its bench strength and muscle strength, if so to say. So how do you see these maneuverings happening in this session and going forward to the next session and subsequently to the general elections in the country?
Neelabh, I think there is no gainsaying fact that we have entered the home stretch of parliamentary calendar. We mentioned at the beginning too. And now, as you rightly pointed out, 2 months down the line, we have elections in 4 important states, which is part of them are the Hindi heartlands, which would have a bearing on the way in which politics and realignments and alliances will take place. I believe the two formations, as one led by the Bharatiya Janata Party, other a coalition umbrella with the Congress probably around its core, which is in the form of INDIA, are more or less the battle lines seem to have been drawn. There could be a few additions or deletions depending on how the landscape changes from here onwards. Now, having said that, these are bound to find reflection in the 2 sessions of Parliament we are going to have, especially in the winter session, because that will be the most crucial session before you turn on to the budget. And budget, as I said, would be more of a perfunctory and because you only can do a vote on account and then go for elections. So there is very little legislative agenda that can be taken up. So there is bound to have some kind of a, because that will be the real last test of strength on either side before they present themselves to the electorate as to why they should be the preferred option.
Professor Mukherjee, you have seen these debates happening on this particular one. As someone who's seen this for all the years, when you say that the electoral democracy and the parliamentary democracy has strengthened in this country, what could be ways out so that despite the points of contention, despite the points of disagreements, the House and the sessions and the meaningful debate takes place in both our houses, the lower house and the upper house?
Well, looking to the major contradictions that the nation faces, I think the Parliament has done a reasonable work. And as the festival of democracy and as Prasad says, the election is approaching where every political party and the group will try to enhance its numbers in Parliament and legislative assemblies. But there is also a very important indicator that I think is very positive. Now, there are 2 national outfits and 2 national parties. So all these debate about that one party dominated system or that there will be only one national party and only regional parties will be there, that I think is getting over. The Indian democracy is stabilizing in the context of 2 national parties, and that I think is a very healthy development.
To just sum up this discussion, what Mr. Prasad and Mr. Mukherjee said, that this is a way forward and this is how the political system, as to borrow what Mr. Prasad said, if there are politicians, there will be politics. But in the end, last fine points as to how do we ensure that we have a very healthy opposition, the federal cooperative system, and also we ensure that both the sides get their fair amount of, while the opposition gets its answer, the government is also able to run its business. Few fine points, both of you gentlemen, so that we can end this discussion now. Mr. Prasad, if you can go first.
Well, I think I was reading Twitter, it's X as they call it, space, from former Prime Minister Mr. Devagowda, who expressed anguish over the loss of important time. He said if he at the age of 90 comes to Parliament, shows the dedication of a senior political leader who was the Prime Minister of the country for important parliamentary processes. Just as people noted the presence of former Prime Minister to come and take part in a vote late in the evening. So this shows there are people who are committed to parliamentary democracy, and such elders do help us to understand the beacon of parliamentary democracy. And I think the young people should take a leaf out of their thing. Debate, discussion certainly should happen. Anything else would limit the processes.
Yeah, Professor Mukherjee, your quick response.
Well, you see, whatever may be the political turbulence and compulsions, the system must be able to work out in a normal manner. That's what democracy demands, and that's what we expect the political process to deliver.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on monsoon session, key bills, discussions, and no confidence motion. The participants were K.V. Prasad, Professor Subrato Mukherjee, political analysts, and Neelabh Srivastava, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on Air Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 92 890-94044.